Classic Plus. You ask 100 people what it is and you get 100 different answers. At least, that's what everyone online says. But what if I told you I knew exactly what it should be? Using all of the successes and failures of the past to create something even greater than what came before. My name is Aramat, and this is Classic Plus. It goes without saying the world of Warcraft itself is the most important, so first up we have new zones. The word new not being exactly accurate since most of these were added in future expansions. The main caveat would be that they are reimagined for Classic both visually and structurally. A delve into what the zones were like before future events take place, starting with the Twilight Highlands. Now just the Highlands, it has a story focused on the Wildhammer Dwarves and Dragonmaw clan's fierce battle for control, and a glimpse into what the icy mountains of Northrend were like before Deathwing shattering. As well as the Red Dragonflight's struggle to contain Grim Batol itself, its inhabitants are cursed, crazed, and trying to break free, with new quests sending players deep into Grim Batol in an attempt to quell the evil inside before it can escape, which would include the never-before-seen Skardan, dwarves twisted by evil magics that encapsulate the entire city. Mount Hyjal. I'm going to be honest, I struggle to think of an interesting reason to come here again. Hyjal being used as a raid in the Burning Crusade and as a zone in Cataclysm makes the already existing landscape boring and repetitive since it's been used twice. That being said, I do have a few ideas that could work, and they are as follows. Number 1. The Emerald Dream or Nightmare raid being tied into this zone, following the Essence of Aranicus attunement quest chain. Number 2. Aiding the Night Elves and the Shadowtooth clan against the Twilight's Hammer, who are trying to take control of the Second Well of Eternity for their old god masters. And number 3. An army of demons from Darkwhisper Gorge attack Hyjal in an attempt to siphon power from Archimonde's body. Or we could go with the combination of the three. Let me know what you'd like to see. Moving on. Uldum was shrouded in mystery for years. The Uldaman Disc quest chain disrupts a cloaking device that surrounds the desert, introducing a new Titan raid or dungeon. And while I personally love the Cataclysm expansion, the zone would have a much more serious atmosphere rather than being an Indiana Jones spoof. Here's the second chance Blizzard needs to do it justice, reintroducing the centauric feline race of Tol'vir and the powerful air elementals the Jinn, with a large focus on the Titans and what they left behind. The Kingdom of Gilneas becoming an actual city is something that's been highly requested since Cataclysm release, and I'm part of that crowd. In this timeline, the Worgen Curse spreads earlier than anticipated, and just as before, the Night Elves send aid to help Greymane and his people, and Lord Godfrey, repeating his future actions, turns against Greymane after finding out he himself is a Worgen. He and the other lords are killed and resurrected by necromancers, whereupon they take over Greymane Manor as a new high-level dungeon or raid, sharing a mixture of Gilnean and Shadowfang Keep aesthetic. Lord Godfrey is one of those characters that deserved better treatment. In a short amount of screen time, he was shown to be morally ambiguous, doing whatever it took to defend Gilneas from the Scourge, Worgen, and the Horde. He also killed Sylvanas in one of the most satisfying ways ever, just straight up blew her guts out like the true Chad that he is. Next we have Tol Barad. Once a military base destroyed during the Second War, what was left behind was reclaimed and converted by Koltyran wizards into a magical prison for the most powerful criminals. Because of its strategic position, it would make sense that the Alliance and Horde would end up fighting for control over the island. Tol Barad is haunted by the spirits of dead soldiers, prisoners, and monsters that inhabit the forest. Baradin Hold could serve as a new dungeon or raid where players must contain a prison break to prevent the inmates from escaping. The island itself could serve as a world PvP area, borrowing over from its predecessor, giving PvP dailies or weeklies, maybe even reintroduce the Battle for Tol Barad battleground in a new form. Tol Barad is one of those locations that I love aesthetically. It reminds me of old Warcraft art. It's got that brutal grit that went away as time went on, and it would fit right in with vanilla. The Dragon Isles is one of those zones that, unfortunately, I doubt would ever come to fruition. It was completely recontextualized in Dragonflight, but man, I still want to see this concept art become a real place. It was used as inspiration for the Shrine of the Storm dungeon in Battle for Azeroth, but BFA is, well... That doesn't mean all hope is lost, however. To the northwest of Tirisfal lies an archipelago, or cluster of islands. I think we could repurpose this area, the Twilight's Hammer and Ajar's Naga combining forces in an attempt to revive the giant Nautilus, alongside Murlocs, Pygmies, and Gilblin. The island of Dr. Lapidus and Gilligam's Isle were originally used for the game's development, now formed into one island west of Stranglethorn Vale past the Vile Reef, making Lapidus Isle. The idea that I had is very obvious, and private servers have beaten me to it. Dr. Lapidus and Gilligim are at odds, both wanting complete control over the island. East and west of Burning Steps. Both of these suggestions come up often, and if you look at the old vanilla WoW map, it does seem like Blizzard had originally planned something for the west. What it could have pertained, I'm unsure. I think an interesting approach would be making it half lava and half ice, containing frost trolls, elementals, and the odd group of dark iron or blackrock who've stumbled upon the area. As for the east, I think a combination of Swamp of Sorrows and Burning Steps would make sense. I do feel inclined to point out, however, that Blackrock Mountain is already full of content, and I'd hate to put even more emphasis on its surrounding area, so this would be a lower priority if I were adding new zones. Alterac Mountains. Not a new zone, but a completely underutilized one. During the Second War, Aiden Paranold betrayed the Alliance to save his own skin, allowing the Orcs passage into Lordaeron without conflict. The Kingdom of Alterac ultimately paid the price for his actions, and I don't think an entire zone overhaul is possible without unearthing the entire area. But they should add actual content here, like the Cut Syndicate hideout under Strombrad, and adding more focus onto the Ravenholt versus Syndicate conflict that takes place in Hillsbrad and Arathi. There's also the South Seas, which was originally planned as the first expansion for World of Warcraft before Blizzard realized they didn't have the tech for it yet, which would include Kazan, Undermine, the Lost Isles, the Maelstrom, Tel Abyss, Kul Tiras, Zandalar, Freehold, and maybe even the Wandering Isle. The way that I would implement them is as a cluster of islands that is accessed via boat from Steamweedle Port in Tanaris. A few zones not mentioned here will be brought up later when I talk about the races in WoW. Now the question is, how many of these are we likely to get? Definitely not all of them. But repurposing existing zones is the fastest, easiest, and more likely route from Blizzard. If I were in charge, that's what I would do first anyway. Targeting the zones that are part of Kalimdor and the Eastern Kingdoms. Eventually, all of these areas could be added over time, or perhaps in a future expansion. Now that the zones are done with, let's move on to sub-areas. Most zones could use additional content to spice things up, whether it's due to lack of quests or motivation to visit zones people dislike. For me, there's always one zone that comes to mind. Silverpine Forest is a zone with amazing atmosphere, but lacks in quests compared to the Barrens. With the addition of Gilneas, Silverpine receiving a few updates would make the Northern Eastern Kingdoms much bigger like its lower counterpart. With the Whispering Forest to the north, an offshore Gilnean base to the west, and additional quests to the farms, Silverpine Forest could finally at the very least rival the Barrens, giving Horde players a much needed break from Kalimdor. Stone Talon Mountains is widely disliked for its long walks, bad drop rates, and tedious quests. The easiest route here is to borrow over from Kata, which opens up the south with the ruins of Eldrathar, and my own edition of the Scorched Valley, and below Stone Talon Peak, an abandoned venture company dig site, leading to the dungeon Stone Talon Caverns, where Thrall followed the trail of Medivh and his prophecy. The Badlands is another area that I would look at, specifically the Earth Elemental quests, which are permanently camped on vanilla servers. Expanding the mountainsides for more spawn locations would help immensely, as well as reintroducing Fuse Light, with the goblins making an effort at mining the Badlands' natural resources and artifacts for their own financial gain. Bring over the Burning Crusade updates to Swamp of Sorrows, Dustwallow Marsh, and Ashenvale, and then there's other zones like Deadwind Pass, Winterspring, Arathi Highlands, and Ajara. I could talk about everything in depth, but this video would be a day long. New and old enemies. One of the cornerstones of Warcraft lore, with the small and brutal skirmishes throughout Azeroth. One of the biggest criticisms of future expansions are the cosmic level forces that we as mortals have to overcome. Good villains like Arthas, Garrosh, and Deathwing are so much more grounded than the Jailer or Xal'atath, who did so much damage on the entire story of World of Warcraft. A return to something more grounded with more enemy diversity will make the world feel more alive, realistic, and true to form. It also gives the opportunity for more variety throughout the zones, not to mention there could be new items, enchants, dungeons, and raids made with these enemies in mind. Some of you will likely disagree with me, but I'm really tired of Oryx, the Black Dragonflight, Undead, and Demons always being at the forefront. There's enough content surrounding them, so let's put the other races in the spotlight for once. Questing is arguably the most fun part of Classic WoW, at least in vanilla. With all of the new zones, sub-areas, enemies, dungeons, and raids, naturally there's going to have to be quests to make you go to these places. There's some long quest chains in Classic WoW that have unrewarding, underwhelming, or no reward at all other than experience. Quest chain rewards should be on par, or in some cases better than dungeon loot. It's important to keep the scale balanced though. We need to encourage players to engage with all of the content in the game and with each other. With the amount of work it would take to truly flesh out the world with new quests, it's more likely we will get new content in patches rather than upfront. Something I feel inclined to point out, however, is the automation of questing. Even if Blizzard were to add a bunch of new content, a large portion of the player base will skip the new content if it means getting to level 60 faster. And well, I'm not going to try and dictate how people should play the game, but without increasing the amount of experience needed, or heavily incentivizing going to these new places, I'm pretty confident in saying meta chasers, streamers, and speedrunners will skip all of it, which is pretty lame, but what can you do about that? I guess the main takeaway here is I believe everyone should just slow down and enjoy the journey. Rares and world bosses. Rare enemy types are underutilized throughout the entire game, which is a shame. So many items and effects locked behind poor respawn timers, or they have bad stats. I want to see items like Tidal Charm actually obtainable, usable, but still retaining some of their novelty of rarity. And new rare items with unique, interesting, or silly effects, which would in turn make exploration and leveling more engaging and exciting on every new playthrough. I could especially see the hardcore community enjoying it. As for world bosses, I'm not a huge fan of the instance versions that Season of Discovery did. I think instance content should be kept to a minimum wherever possible. If I could choose, I'd just have the world bosses' respawn timers reduced to an hour or two with the 1 week lockout. But it's not a hill that I would die on either, so that's just my opinion. World buffs. World buffs are a point of contention among the classic player base, but personally I'm on the side of disabling them in raids. They should be something that brings players together as they normally do, but only for the ease of dungeons, questing, or farming. You could even make world buffs a quest reward in certain situations, maybe at the end of a long quest chain. An example being, after discovering the fate of Olga and the Barons, Mankrik's grief rallies the hearts of those in the crossroads, which would incentivize players to finish his quest chain, even just for the social aspect of everyone gathering in the crossroads and getting the buff. Holidays and world events. It's definitely a very low priority, but holidays in WoW are extremely underwhelming, for the most part being unchanged since WoW originally launched. Hollow's End, Winter's Veil, and Brewfest are holidays that could be vastly expanded in some way. For world events, I've seen requests for more things like the opening of Ahn'Qiraj, the Scourge and Elemental invasions, the Blood Moon and Stranglethorn Vale, or the Battle for Ashenvale. If done properly and sparingly, it could be fun, but again, low priority. Reputations. Reputations in Vanilla WoW are often unrewarding, or in some cases provide nothing at all. I want to avoid a situation where reputation grind becomes mandatory, but there should be some reward for taking your time to grind them out. A town that rivals Booty Bay for the Blood Cell after hitting Friendly, for example. Or special quests, vendors, recipes, or items. Anything is better than nothing. I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts on what you'd like to see, because there's so many routes you could go here. Transportation. New forms of transportation could also be very cool. Things like optimized flight paths, cart systems, or temporary mounts in specific low-level areas. On the other hand, we have the suggestion that I see come up way too often. Flying. I can imagine just about everyone would agree that flying is bad for the game, but I still see flying come up in every Classic Plus discussion. The cost of convenience is making the world significantly more empty, any peril completely flown over. Not to mention flying could lock players out of certain content. Flying should have been a Burning Crusade exclusive feature that never came back, or only in a select few areas. I think flying was one of the worst things that ever happened to WoW, but that's me getting off topic. And that covers the world section. Let's move on to PvE. New dungeons, raids, and updates. Probably the most exciting part for most people when it comes to expanding Classic WoW. Man, there's so many ideas running around for what dungeons and raids there could be. Timbermaw Hold, the Bay of Storms, the Syndicate Hideout, Bloodcell Bay, Stone Talon Caverns, Dark Cloud Pinnacle, and while it's easy to get ahead of ourselves and go crazy with a ton of new places, it's important to spread everything out and be careful with how many instances are added. Every level bracket deserves some content after all, not just level 60. It should also be noted that many dungeons that already exist are skipped over during the leveling process by most players. Razorfen Downs, Gnomeregan, Blackfathom Deep's Uldaman, and Sunken Temple desperately need updates to their loot and their quests. I'd also say the Stockades, which is the worst dungeon in the game. These dungeons have far off locations and weird level ranges, which is why they're so often skipped. Hell, hardly anyone would run Sunken Temple if it weren't for the class quests that come with Dire Maul, and it's pretty safe to say the Season of Discovery dungeons are likely to return. And I know I'm going to piss off a few people by saying Karazhan Crypts felt way too much like private server content, and should be remodeled entirely. Anyhow, here's a breakdown of each dungeon level and their ranges. If we were to get new dungeons, one should be added to every bracket, with the 48 to 55 range getting at least 2, since the only real options here are Princess runs, Sunken Temple, or BRD prison runs. Mechanics. Classic WoW isn't exactly known for its difficulty, as it's a pretty easy game when it comes down to it, so I'd love to see new mechanics added to every dungeon and raid. I want the game to slowly but surely engrave into players' heads the importance of interrupts, crowd control, dispels, and clever use of their class's entire kit. Some of the most fun I've ever had in the game is the pre-nerf Burning Crusade and Cataclysm heroic dungeons. They're pretty much the gold standard for dungeon design when it comes to pressuring players to use everything at their disposal. I want to see encounters that incentivize bringing certain classes that can perform certain tasks, but not mechanics only a single class can do. There are times when you just can't find something, so it's a bad idea to make anything class specific. Heroic, Mythic Plus, and mini dungeons. Heroic dungeons come up often in discussions, and I can see why. Once you're level 60, there's only a handful of dungeons that stay relevant, so making every dungeon scale up to max level could be interesting, but I'm afraid of the implications. If every dungeon were to have viable gear, then the pre-raid or phase 1 loot chase could be quite daunting. But if heroics were meant to be more of a challenge for other loot, like crafting materials, badges, or cosmetics, then I could see them being a lot of fun. But I wouldn't want a system like Mythic Plus, it just doesn't belong in a classic setting. Though it is a pretty popular suggestion from what I've seen online. The amount of gatekeeping and toxicity that would stem from that system being added would be immense, especially if class balance is bad. It would also mean the weekly vault would be introduced, and I can't imagine many people would enjoy that. And now for mini dungeons, which just means shorter dungeon content. Dungeons that can be knocked out in about 20 minutes or so. Think of places like the Violet Hold or Trial of the Crusader. Demonfall Canyon from SOD also comes to mind. As for raids, controversial opinion for sure, but they should stick to just one difficulty. I really dislike having item level disparities between raid settings because it forces players that want a more relaxed environment into heroic, and it sort of builds up on the toxicity problem. If heroic raids do exist, then they should at most grant cosmetic options like gear, pets, mounts, and enchants. Raid size. Now, there's a few options for raids as far as I'm concerned. 10-man, 25, and flex. I know a lot of classic purists are insistent that raids stay at 40-man, but World of Warcraft is, truthfully, not attracting new players. And the player base as a whole is only getting older and leaving the game as time goes on for real-life responsibilities. Finding like-minded people that you get along with is already a difficult task. Combine that with the need for 40 people, and you have a recipe for disaster, as many guild masters will tell you. And one that I believe is a contributing factor into why Vanilla's player count takes a nosedive with each passing phase. And I can understand the argument for keeping things on a grander scale, but a flexible raid system allows everyone involved to play the game how they want. Lastly, as I said before, I don't want to see any item level gear disparity between the raid sizes. Instead, it should drop more loot and most to compensate the bigger raid size. Solo content. Classic WoW already has some interesting content with Rockdalar, Benediction, the Dreadsteed and Charger quest chains, and while it's not a fully single-player experience, relying on dungeons or raids to complete them, more solo content similar to that would be extremely well received, so long as they're done properly. Other activities like the Legion Mage Tower or Brawlers Guild from Mists of Pandaria are brought up often. Personally, I'm a fan of both, especially the Brawlers Guild, and I'd love to see some iteration of it included in some capacity, though I'll admit there are way more important things to work on. Legendaries. Boy, you guys are gonna cook me for this one. Controversial statement, I think the legendary system in WoW is bad. Endless amounts of drama, arguing, heartbreak, whatever you want to call it. The only time it's decent is during Mists of Pandaria and Warlords of Draenor, but most wouldn't classify that gear as legendary since any and everyone can have it so long as they work on the quest. The only compromise I can think of that would somewhat satisfy both parties is making everything work like ATS, so the chosen recipient knows that eventually they'll have an item after enough time, rather than hoping for a drop that may never come. Definitely a touchy topic, but I think the system should be changed. Horizontal progression. I'm sure everyone is familiar with the term by now. TLDR, it means gear from older dungeons, raids, and professions stay relevant whether it's through powerful stats or set bonuses, or class modifications. And while I think it is important for older content to stay relevant in some way, WoW has always been about vertical progression. Balancing the game around both of these ideals would be pretty difficult, and admittedly, I don't really know how they could approach it without making it an endless gear chase, but enabling alternative playstyles through tier sets, item bonuses, or trinkets could be a lot of fun. Speaking of loot, I think there should be an item sweep. Since Vanilla WoW is full of items that are outright useless, while not every piece of gear needs to be best in slot, some rebalancing should be considered. And finally, I would love to see more unique items like Iron Foe, Fell Striker, the Vanquished Tentacle of Cthulhu, even at lower levels. Let Season of Discovery be a cautionary tale of how easily player power can get out of control. Shaman tanks grabbing 100 mobs at a time, druids with 50,000 health, what a mess. I understand that it was a testing ground, but let's not make that mistake again, Blizzard. It's important to have power level scale gradually, not in explosive intervals. Though I can't say it's a surprise, considering how many stat squishes they've done with retail ever since Legion. PvP content. PvP balance is not Vanilla WoW's strong suit. In order for any sort of rank ladder to exist, like arenas or rated battlegrounds, then Blizzard has to make a choice. Do they want PvP to have wild imbalances, RNG, and hard counters, or do they want it to be competitive? From what I've read online, it seems to be about 50-50 between the community. Half the players want the game to stay the same, with a lot of the more serious PvPers wanting a balanced meta with more modern systems in place. Either way, it's going to upset someone. Things like resilience, PvP power, 2-minute trinket, resist, heartbeat, and spell batching all play a huge factor into how the game feels. The trickle-down effect from either choice will play its part in the upcoming sections. New, updated, and rated battlegrounds. It's no secret that battlegrounds in World of Warcraft have long been ignored by Blizzard, and it's time for that to change. I want to see new and returning maps come into the game, as well as updates to the current system. Warsong Gulch, Arathi Basin, and Alterac Valley do not have timers in Vanilla WoW, which can often lead to extremely long games or turtles that feel like a waste of time. So a rather simple fix is adding a timer and reinforcement count to every battleground, so you can win by objective or attrition, rather than taking the deserter debuff or sitting in a 1-hour match. If games were quicker, the grind wouldn't be as mind-numbingly dull, and I think player engagement would be significantly higher. Rated battlegrounds, on the other hand, are an extremely popular suggestion that I think ultimately would be a waste of time on Blizzard's part. Every single expansion that includes RBGs leads to gatekeeping, RMT, or win trading. Not to mention their overall participation count is very low. It's an interesting idea, but unless those problems are addressed, I don't think it's worth the effort. The ranking system. The grind for rank 14 isn't a testament of skill, but rather how much time you have. Truthfully, there's no real way to fix the system that I can think of without making most people ignore the ranking grind. If you remove the epic gear, a vast majority of players will just ignore it since they don't actually care about PvP. Likewise, if you nerf it, it'll have the same effect. So what can we do with the ranking system? Honestly, I have no idea. I really hate how strong the gear is in PvE. Unless they add modifiers like resilience, PvP power, or more PvP-oriented stats that just make the gear worse in raids, I'm sort of at a loss for what should happen with the ranking system. I know a lot of people like that PvP gear is viable in PvE and vice versa, but from a competitive standpoint, it's always a bad idea, but that's just my opinion. Arenas. While they'd be a good addition to the game, I'm just not sure how popular they would be, or what the rewards would be besides title or mounts. If rank 14 gear exists, what gear would you get from arenas? What is the overall power level of that gear? As I mentioned earlier, if there isn't significant changes to how PvP functions, then they just won't be played except in the first initial season. The first step toward making it more participated in is lowering the rating requirements for rewards. I've always thought that even though I don't struggle myself to get to 2400, the vast majority of players do. Honestly, most players struggle to get anything beyond 1800, especially in more recent classic releases. I do think gladiator titles should still be for the top 1%, but everything else should have their requirements reduced. So, to sum things up, arenas are a great idea, but only if they balance PvP. Let's move on to something that is a little bit more exciting. Expanding world PvP. New quests, world events, dueling areas, and rewards for engaging in PvP around the world of Azeroth. With new weekly quests that have you attacking or defending a capital city, slaying a faction leader, collecting the bones of your enemies, or attacking an enemy town or fortress. And other world quests including the Battle for Hillsbrad, Ashenvale, Tol Barad, and Stranglethorn Vale. Reworked world events like the Gurubashi Arena, Crucible of Carnage, and the Maw, with spectators, unique rewards, and honor bonuses. World PvP has always had the potential of being a lot of fun, and with these new incentives to go out and participate, even players who normally wouldn't engage with World PvP will go out and fight for their faction. I'm someone who normally doesn't care to play on PvP servers, but even I would go out and play if there were cool reasons to do so. Imagine these types of rewards that you can purchase with honor or bloody tokens. Which brings me to the next point. Griefing. Everyone watching this video has experienced griefing at some point or another. A group of max levels running around as a death squad, ganking low level players, or permanently camping a lone level 60. There needs to be some sort of system in place to prevent long-term griefing sessions from taking place. A solution that most people suggest are dishonorable kills, but that depends on how the honor and rank 14 system works. But stopping griefing is extremely important. If they want to avoid things like war mode being implemented, then there needs to be items that unflag you for PvP, help you escape, or punish the ganker with a permanent debuff after repeated offenses. Classes, races, and racials. Most classes need pretty massive overhauls to make them more viable at level 60, instead of it just being all warriors. Every class should have at least decent performance in endgame raids. The Burning Crusade, Wrath of the Lich King, and Cataclysm had some of the best balance when it came to making every individual spec wanted, but then there are classes like Shaman that are so universally wanted that it makes the game less fun. Originally I had a ton of new talents and spells that I wanted to show off as ideas, but that would be like an hour long, so long story short, make everything viable. New races. Naga, Ogre, and Murloc are the most requested races from what I've seen, and while I agree, the truth is the chance of any of them being added is nearly zero. If they aren't playable in retail, I sincerely doubt the effort would be made for them to be playable in Classic. My suggestion is definitely a controversial statement. Blizzard should reintroduce Blood Elf, Goblin, Worgen, and Draenei, bringing back the Burning Crusade starting zones and cities, alongside Gilneas. As for the Goblins, unless Kazan is in the game, I don't think it's realistic for them to have a city. The easiest lore excuse is to just say that the Steamweedle Cartel are hired mercenaries, who start alongside the Tauren in their fight against the Venture Company in Mulgore. Now, I have to address the High Elf in the room. Even though I would like High Elf, they shouldn't be put into the game. Not unless a new option is also for the Horde. It doesn't make sense to me to sacrifice Eversong Woods and the Ghostlands and leaving Blood Elf unplayable. For some reason, a lot of players have been saying Blood Elves joining the Horde doesn't make sense, and to that I say, go play Warcraft 3. Not adding the 4 races that already exist seems like a total waste. Players like myself and others should have the option of playing them, and I'd really hate to see all of them left out for some lame arbitrary reason, which is more or less what some people want. Racials. Oh man, I'm definitely gonna get comments on this one. Racials should be unique, but their power levels need to be better balanced, as well as adding more flavorful racials. For too long, Human and Orc have been the best option through most of the game's history, which is pretty lame. I know many people who always play the meta races instead of the race they want to play, just because of the racials. So I would like to see better balance here. New race class combinations and customization. Human Hunter, Undead Paladin, Dwarf Shaman, Gnome Priest, Blood Elf Warrior. Another step in making the game just more fun to play. And yeah, I can already hear some of you yelling Undead Paladin doesn't make sense, that canonically all Undead Priests are Shadow Priests. And that's just not true. It was just some weird thing people kept saying online. It's never stated anywhere in WoW lore, except simply that using the Holy Light affects them in certain ways. Alongside new combinations should come new hairstyles. Hair, eye colors, tattoos, and subrace options. Wildhammer Dwarves, Draenor Orcs, Grim Totem Tauren, different troll tribes. Just generally a lot of the things people have been asking for over the years. No allied races, just additional options. New classes. I'm gonna be honest with you guys. Just like with the races, I think Death Knight, Demon Hunter, and Monk should be brought back. And no, I'm not saying port them over one for one, but if you look at their kits from Wrath of the Lich King, Mists of Pandaria, and Legion, you could very easily convert their abilities into something that fits into vanilla WoW. Obviously, Monk and Demon Hunter would be significantly less mobile, which is probably the first thing everyone thinks of when it comes to those two classes. As far as actual brand new classes, I personally think Bard would be the most interesting. Necromancer, Tinker, and Alchemist are simply too similar to already existing classes, and I don't think they have enough going for them to be worth the effort. I originally had this particular section much longer, but trust me, if it's done right, these classes would be an amazing addition to the game. Which leads me to the next part, new specs. New class specializations is a hot topic online, and I don't think they're necessary, nor do I really want them. Season of Discovery introduced 5 new ways to play, with Rogue, Shaman, and Warlock Tank, as well as Gladiator Warrior and Healing Mage. I know I'm gonna get hate for this, but besides Gladiator stance, I don't think any of these really belong. They're extremely off-putting for a couple of reasons. From a lore standpoint, what sense does it make that warlocks and rogues are tanks? Warlocks are casters and the ones who are least likely to care about the well-being of their allies, and rogues are thieves who attack from the shadows. They just don't make sense to me at all, but I suppose the argument could be made your role-playing is more of a swashbuckler, duelist type character. As for shamans, I'm willing to concede they did have talents for it in vanilla, but in terms of lore, shamans just aren't tanks. They should instead focus on balancing the existing specs rather than adding new ones, and if you're the type of person that loved the new specs, then you shouldn't oppose the classes I mentioned earlier being added. Moving on to professions. The profession system was dated even when it first released. In most cases, you are better off leveling to 60 without touching any main professions at all, at least in terms of overall efficiency. Which is sad, but true. Professions should be relevant while leveling, making the journey easier, more rewarding, and respecting the player's time. Blacksmithing is notoriously bad at this, recipes often requiring materials far above their skill level. So an overall rebalance is required so that professions have a better leveling curve. This is also an opportunity to add jewel crafting, inscription, and archaeology in the classic, and potentially other professions like survival or woodworking. Jewel crafting and inscription already have a decent pool of items for the old world, and archaeology already exists, so porting over its technology shouldn't be that difficult. What made archaeology so odd was the world's relevancy didn't really matter at that point, but in a more RPG, lore-focused game like vanilla, it could be a lot more interesting. Adding tons of unique flavorful discoveries to every zone, rather than just recycled ones. On-screen are new items that I've created. I'd love for Inscription to craft not only stat scrolls, but spell scrolls and utility scrolls like water walking, as well as powerful books, tomes, and grimoires. Another easy way of adding more depth are the profession bonuses that came in Wrath of the Lich King, but I'd like them to be less X class goes Y, instead providing more general benefits regardless of what you are. Season of Discovery did a terrible job at this, where they just added insanely overstated items, more or less forcing you into that profession. And now for the final section of this video. Quality of life. There's plenty of quality of life changes that come to mind. Dual specialization, the barber shop, lower mana cost buffs, quest tracker, shared mob drops, mage tables, soul wells, summoning stones. The majority of the common requests are fine and do not go against the spirit of Classic. The amount of people that have said changing your hairstyle or hair color is anti-classic is honestly quite hilarious. The only restriction should be gender locked, but overall almost everything included on the list is fine. Okay, so if you made it this far, I want you to hear me out. Transmog. It's kind of sad to me that so many people are against it. In a way, it's horizontal progression, which is what a lot of people are requesting for Classic Plus. It opens up so many new reward opportunities when it comes to prestige awards, whether it's arenas, rated battlegrounds, raids, or achievements. I really don't get the hate toward it. I think the funniest and most hypocritical argument against transmog is the I want to see what people are wearing so I can be like him one day, or I know who's a threat in PvP. People love to scream this from the rooftop. Yet, Vanilla WoW has plenty of ways to obscure your character, and you see it all the time. Deviate Fish, Noggin Fogger, Dartol's Rod of Transformation, Gordok Ogre Suit, Orb of Deception, even druids in their animal forms. I mean, really, everyone in Classic looks the same, and I'm tired of hearing the same stupid argument anytime transmog comes up. Even with the limited amount of armor sets in the game, you could still create some unique looking sets with transmog. And if you needed any convincing, watch these clips of Zaryu.
Transmog is 76% no, 24% yes. I'm with you guys. I do not want transmog in Classic Plus. It ruins the excitement of going up and seeing someone with their cool shoulders or tabard, or I guess tabard maybe not as much, but like cool sword, weapon, gear. You want to see what someone, they're wearable achievements. We've talked about this a million times. Once you have transmog in the game, you lose the wearable achievement to some degree. Doesn't feel as good. No transmog for Classic Plus.
Are you kidding me, man? That's insane. Put the glasses on, you can barely see him too. Because that's kind of annoying. I want to look like this all the time. This is so cool.
Now with that out of the way, let's move on. Achievements. I don't have anything against them, but I've never cared for them either. The only real input I have is they shouldn't be in your face, since I think the pop-up is kind of annoying. But for the people who enjoy achievement hunting, why not? Offer some unique titles in transmog and plenty of people would engage with it. HD models. Given I just ranted about how much I love transmog, naturally you'd think I'd want these too, but I don't. The updated models are honestly the worst abominations ever added to the game, and I really mean that. Out of all of the terrible decisions Blizzard has made over the years, the updated models were just the worst. Well, besides the Legion class overhaul. I'm probably going to make a video about it one day, but long story short, the new models look nothing like Warcraft and really push that cartoony, over-the-top, goofy look that honestly kind of ruined the game all on its own. The bot problem, gold buying, and GDKP. Bots are running rampant on every version of WoW, and everyone knows why. Gold buying. Blizzard claims that their current anti-cheat is the best way to deal with bots, which is in waves, but I'm not so sure about that one. What we really need are active GMs. Even just 1 or 2 per server could have a massive impact, but they're too busy simping for their favorite streamers, I guess. I'm sure they'll be in the comments section, but gold buyers will tell you they do it because they're too busy to farm and that they just want to play the game. I can understand the sentiment, but they don't realize the amount of damage they're causing for everyone. So if Blizzard isn't going to deal with bots or gold buying, then at the very least they should make consumables and crafting reagents easily obtainable by playing the game. I don't really care if gold is valuable or not, and if the current situation is going to stay this way, I'd rather gold is just worthless. And now for GDKP. Listen guys, don't shoot the messenger, okay? GDKP by itself is fine if you want to play that way. It's not for me, but let's not pretend that GDKPs aren't just a way to trade bot gold from one hand to another. I've never understood why people buy gold, why even bother playing the game at that point. It wouldn't be very fun or satisfying for me anyway, but that's enough about that. Public test realms, early access, and data mining. I'll keep it brief. I don't think any of these things should be available for Classic Plus. While public testing is a good way to find and fix bugs, we've seen with Cataclysm and Mists of Pandaria Classic that Blizzard won't fix a ton of the bugs that are found anyway. Early access, on the other hand, is a popular leak that I keep seeing online, and I don't think they should allow early access, but if they're planning on it, it would leave a sour taste in my mouth. And finally, data mining. I want all of the new content to actually be a surprise for everyone, the way the game used to be. Let players figure out the new dungeons, raids, and content in real time, rather than all of it being figured out before it even launches. The last topic I have is community. It's no secret that WoW is full of toxic players, so I'm leaving the make love, not war part at the end. I just want to remind everyone that while we can be tryhards competing against each other, whether it's who has better logs or who has a higher rating, that there's a person behind the monitor who has just as many or more problems than you do. So try to be a bit more considerate before you launch a barrage of insults at some random guy. Unless they're at level 60 that's ganking a lobby, that is. But no, seriously. World of Warcraft has gotten so toxic over the years, so this is me asking everyone to be a little bit better. I'm no saint either, but it's a healthy reminder. And with that said, that's almost every topic I could think of for this video. If you enjoyed it, please throw me a like or even a comment. A lot of work went into this and I would greatly appreciate it. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in Azeroth.